I turned 33 on a rainy Thursday. The kind of rain that doesn't pour, just lingers. The kind that doesn't drench you outright, but seeps into your shoes and sticks under your skin. I wore a navy dress with sleeves that grazed my wrists. Something elegant but understated. Hoping it would say, I showed up for this, without sounding like I was trying too hard. The restaurant sat on a quiet corner just outside downtown, where the windows fog from the inside and the cutlery gleams a little brighter than it needs to. I made the reservation a week in advance, gave them the names of everyone who said they'd be there. Family, a table for 6. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I always do. 15 minutes to steady my nerves, maybe touch up my lipstick in the mirror. I watched the server light a small candle at the center of the table, its flame dancing against the growing dusk outside. They sat me by the window, just close enough to watch people stroll by under umbrellas and streetlights. 6 seats, neatly spaced, 6 glasses polished and waiting. At 6:45 I glanced at my phone. Nothing. I thought of Velma's laugh, of Curtis texting last week that he'd absolutely be there, of Zaria's constant promises to make more time. I pictured them running late, stuck in traffic, maybe grabbing a card on the way. I ordered a glass of red and practiced nonchalance, scrolling through news headlines, discount codes from stores I hadn't shopped at in months. The candle flickered. The wine stained the rim of my glass, untouched. By 7:05, my confidence began to bustle. Not outwardly, outwardly. I smiled at the waiter when he asked if I wanted to order. I'll wait a bit longer, I said, brushing off his glance the way you brush crumbs from your lap. Inside, something was collapsing in slow motion. Still, I played the part, checked the reservation name with the hostess again. Yes, party of 6, I said, my voice too cheerful, too rehearsed. At 7:30 my phone buzzed. A text, not from Zaria, not from Curtis, from my mother. Just one sentence. 12 words that carved a hole straight through the fabric of the evening. You're not our priority right now. I stared at it. Read it again. No greeting. No birthday wishes. No explanation. Just that, as if it were normal, as if I should understand. For a moment, I didn't move. I watched the candle flutter in its glass holder, felt my chest tighten, then loosen, as if air was slowly deciding whether to stay. I didn't cry. There wasn't room, not with the waiter glancing over, not with strangers sipping wine around me, not with someone celebrating an anniversary 2 tables over, toasting with the kind of laughter that reminded me how quiet my own table had become. Then he returned, gently setting a small gold-wrapped package on the table. Someone dropped this off earlier. He said, from your family. He smiled, waiting for my reaction. I nodded, thanked him, touched the corner of the box like it might disappear if I opened it too quickly. The wrapping was flawless, matte, minimalist, the kind of care that mimics effort but skips intention. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a pale blue scarf, soft silk, that shimmered slightly under the candlelight. I knew this scarf. I'd bought it last Christmas, remembered the brand, the stitching, the little snag near the hem where my mum had caught it on her bracelet. Beneath the tissue paper, a card, happy birthday, from all of us. But beneath those words, faint and haunting, was my own handwriting. The message I'd written a year ago. Love you always, Mum. They hadn't even replaced the card. I put the scarf back into the box like it was made of glass. My hands were still. My breath wasn't. The restaurant around me kept humming, oblivious. More laughter, more plates being set down, more lives unfolding in real time while mine had just cracked at the edges. I didn't make a scene. I didn't call anyone. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't feel like begging. I took a sip of wine. It was bitter, but not more than the moment itself. I looked around at the 5 empty seats that had once carried the weight of my anticipation, now stripped of meaning, each one a placeholder for a relationship I had convinced myself was salvageable. At 7:42, I reached into my purse and pulled out a sticky note. I'd brought it to jot down a grocery list for the weekend. Instead, I wrote 5 words. I left a 20 under my glass, more than enough to cover the drink and the apology I didn't owe anyone. I stood up, steady, walked out into the now steady rain, heels clicking against wet pavement, past strangers in coats, past memories that now felt like fiction. Inside, the table remained. The gift sat untouched. The bread basket, barely dented. The sticky note, nestled between the candle and the scarf. Thank you. No more seats. By the time I got home, Denver was hushed, the kind of hush that feels earned, like the city itself was exhausted. I didn't turn on the lights, let the glow of passing headlights fill the room. My purse hit the counter. My shoes landed beside the door. I poured a glass of water I wouldn't finish and sat on the edge of the couch like I was still waiting. The quiet felt louder than it should. My phone buzzed. I let it sit. Eventually. Curiosity won. Instagram notification. Zaria posted a new photo. I told myself not to click. Then I did. The image loaded slowly. I wasn't prepared. There they were. All of them. My brother, my mom, Zaria, even Uncle Ray, who hadn't been around in years. Smiling, champagne glasses raised, standing in front of the Marina restaurant in Boulder. Curtis held out a new keyring with a motorcycle emblem. The caption celebrating the dreamer. He finally made it! I stared, my chest turned inside out. The scarf around Velma's neck, the watch on Curtis's wrist, the one he said he couldn't afford, the one he had asked my opinion on months ago. I scrolled. My hand moved before my heart could catch up. Opened my banking app. Search Tuesday. $1,500. Wired to Curtis. For rent. He said. Scared. He said. I had believed him. He wasn't scared. He was shopping. The screen dimmed as I let the phone slip from my hand. My eyes didn't burn. I didn't feel rage. I felt still, like I had stepped out of my own life and was watching someone else's unfold. I got up, sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, created a new file. Support unreciprocated. I started listing it all. The cursor blinked at the top of the document like it was daring me to begin. I titled the file Support Unreciprocated, a name that felt too clean for what it held. Line by line. I typed every moment I remembered lending myself to people who treated my help like a given, a bailout, a background service they never had to acknowledge, car payment, Curtis, mortgage gap, Velma, emergency dental, Zaria's youngest, groceries, last-minute hotel costs, cash handed over at baby showers with hugs and no follow-up. I didn't write these in anger. I wrote them like receipts, like evidence. Not because I needed revenge, because I needed to stop pretending they never happened. Each line chipped away at the story I had built about us, the myth I had protected that if you give enough, if you show up often, if you love hard enough, eventually they'll meet you there. But love like this doesn't grow roots. It drains. Slowly, quietly, until all you're left with is the ache of how long it took you to see it. I wasn't invisible. I was useful, and that was worse. I opened my browser and typed the word selective family amnesia. It sounded dramatic, but the phrase made sense. How else do you explain people forgetting your name when it's time to toast? but remembering your number when they're short on rent. How else do you explain being erased from group photos, but included in the monthly bills? My phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail. From Velma. I didn't listen. Not because I was angry because I didn't owe her my attention anymore. I moved the notification to the corner of the screen and returned to my list. Curtis's motorcycle party, $1,200. Paid with the same money I loaned him in tears. The scarf re-gifted, re-wrapped, repurposed, and the card. My handwriting still clung to the corners like bruises. That was the thing about moments like this. They weren't just painful. They were insulting, a quiet kind of disrespect that dressed itself up as forgetfulness. I remembered Christmas 3 years ago. Everyone gathered around the tree, taking turns with gifts while I stood at the kitchen counter plating cookies. Curtis gave a speech that ended with, "We're all so blessed to have each other," then forgot to mention me. Zaria kissed me on the cheek afterward and said, "I hope you know we love you, even if we don't say it," then left me to do the dishes. But this birthday. This one was louder in its absence. This one wasn't a slip. It was a statement. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen. Outside. Denver's skyline blurred against the night. Headlights swam across the windows. The world moved on, inside. I stayed still, the kind of stillness that only comes when you stop trying to explain the hurt and start naming it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted someone to walk into the room, see the gaps and say, "That's where she stood. That's what she carried." But they didn't. So I kept writing. The file grew longer. It wasn't just money. It was time, energy, emotional holding. Every moment I'd shown up without being asked because I knew no one else would. Curtis's eviction scare, Velma's surgery prep, Zaria's baby shower, planned on my laptop, funded with my savings. Each act of love a line item now. Not to hold against them, but to stop holding inside me like a secret debt I was too ashamed to name. I remembered the weekend trip I cancelled last spring. Friends had planned it months in advance. Beach house, group dinner, fire pit laughter. I pulled out 2 days before because Velma's pipes burst. She called me crying. I can't get a hold of Curtis. And you're the only one who knows how to shut the valve. I drove over, spent hours in rubber gloves, missed the ocean, missed the laughter. "You saved me," she'd said, then forgot. I had given so much of myself away that I no longer knew what was mine. The document neared a second page. I stared at the screen, wondering how many more entries I had buried in my memory. The ones I'd dismissed as just being a good daughter, a helpful sister, the dependable one. Titles that sounded noble, until they became reasons to be ignored. And that's what hit me hardest. They hadn't just skipped my dinner. They'd held a celebration without me. With the money I gave them. They hadn't just forgotten my birthday. They'd used it as a reason to gather, just not with me. I scrolled through the Instagram post again. The smiles, the wine glasses, the glow of joy on faces I used to know. I looked closely at Curtis's watch. It was the same model he'd sent me a picture of in February. "Do you think this is too flashy?" he'd asked. I told him not to buy it. "I can't afford it anyway," he said, but there it was, on his wrist, paid for with the same $1,500 that drained from my account last Tuesday. I didn't cry. That part of me had gone quiet, like a faucet finally turned off. What I felt wasn't sadness, it was steadiness. Like I had finally stopped spinning stories to protect people who wouldn't even sit at my table. I opened a new tab, searched for the phrase "signs your family is emotionally exploitative." The results didn't surprise me. Guilt-driven requests, uneven effort, absence masked as busyness, rewriting the story when you speak up. I clicked into one article, scrolled halfway down, then closed it. I didn't need confirmation. I had lived it. Back on my file, I added a new section, emotional overdrafts. I didn't track dollars there. I tracked moments, missed vacations, phone calls ended with, "You're overreacting," parties where I was asked to take the photos but never handed a glass of champagne. I wrote them all, not to punish them, to free myself. Outside, the sky had deepened into that navy hue that makes city lights look like stars. Inside, my screen glowed with the evidence of my own remembering. The truth was this: they didn't forget. They decided I didn't matter enough to prioritize, and I had decided, finally, to believe them. The next morning arrived dressed in muted light, slipping past the blinds like it was trying not to be noticed. I hadn't slept deeply. My body was still, but my mind hadn't stopped moving. There's a particular kind of ache that comes from emotional depletion. It doesn't rage or shout. It just simmers under your skin like a fever with nowhere to go. I made coffee out of habit, 2 scoops. The dark roast I'd saved for special mornings. I didn't know if this one qualified, but the weight of the previous night still pressed against my chest, and something about the smell of coffee made the silence feel less personal. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and stared at the file I'd titled "Support Unreciprocated." It blinked at me, waiting for more. Instead, I opened a new tab. Something had been tugging at me since last night, an itch in the back of my mind I hadn't scratched yet. I went back to Zaria's post, the one with the smiling faces in front of the Marina restaurant. I clicked into it again, but this time I didn't stop at the surface. I zoomed in. Velma's scarf blue, soft, unmistakable, rested on her shoulders, smug and effortless. The same scarf I had unwrapped with shaking hands the night before. Curtis stood beside her, grinning like the night belonged to him. On his wrist was the watch he'd sworn he couldn't afford, the same one I had once told him not to buy because he was behind on rent. Apparently, he took my advice and bought it with my money. The comments on the post rolled in like glittering debris. "So proud of you." Curtis, a family that celebrates together, wins together. "Zaria, your mum looks amazing." My stomach turned. My hand hovered over the screen like I might pull the truth out of the pixels. There it was. My family, dressed in joy, funded by my sacrifice. Not even a mention of me, not even a lie to cover up my absence. I minimized the tab and opened my banking app again, just to confirm what I already knew. The transfer from Tuesday sat there, smug and irreversible. $1,500. Sent with trust and urgency. Curtis had called me crying. Said the landlord had threatened to evict him. Said he was scared. He wasn't scared. He was shopping. I stared at the screen long enough for it to time out. I leaned back, the chair creaking under the shift of weight. My eyes traced the edge of the living room, the way the light cut shadows across the floor. It was a normal day. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. My phone buzzed again, another voicemail. Velma. I didn't listen, not because I couldn't, but because I finally didn't need to. I knew exactly what it would say. An apology wrapped in avoidance. A guilt trip disguised as concern. A suggestion that I had misread the situation again. Instead, I opened the folder I had started weeks ago for financial planning. I created a new tab and titled it Emotional Overdrafts. Here, I wouldn't list money. I'd list the moments I'd poured out pieces of myself in exchange for nothing but silence. The times I said yes while my stomach twisted. The events I missed to solve their emergencies. The love I gave that never echoed back. Trip to New Mexico cancelled to help Curtis with his car. Thanksgiving groceries catered on my card. Never reimbursed. Zaria's baby shower decorated and funded. Thanked only on Facebook. It wasn't that I expected anything in return. It's that they expected everything without question. And somewhere along the way, I began to confuse loyalty with being disposable. I remembered Zaria's wedding. I was seated at the back, next to someone's college roommate and the florist's assistant. During the toast, she raised her glass to her amazing family and stumbled over my name. Aylin, drawn out and uncertain, like I was a second cousin she hadn't seen in a decade. I'd spent the morning setting up the centerpieces and steaming her veil, Christmas Eve. I'd been in the kitchen for 20 minutes, prepping roasted vegetables, while the rest of them took photos by the tree. When I finally brought the food out, Uncle Ray looked up and said, "Oh, you're here," I smiled. Said nothing. I always smiled. I always said nothing. But this birthday, this wasn't just forgettable. This was deliberate. I looked back at the scarf on my dining table, still folded in the gift box they had repurposed. It no longer felt like silk. It felt like paper, like something fragile and full of lies. I picked it up, held it to the light. The snag near the hem winked at me. Proof of its origin. Proof they hadn't even tried to hide it. Then I opened a photo from last year's family dinner. Everyone was gathered around the table. Velma holding wine. Zaria mid-laugh. Curtis already wearing gravy on his shirt. I wasn't in the photo, because I had taken it. I scrolled through the album. Dozens of photos. None of me. That was the pattern. I was always behind the lens. Behind the ride. Behind the favor. The sacrifice. Always present. Never visible. I stared at that photo for a long time before I whispered aloud. I was never in the picture. Because I was the one framing it. There was no anger left. No heartbreak, either. Just the kind of clarity that stands quietly in the room and waits for you to notice it. The kind that rearranges your entire story without shouting. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mara, an old co-worker. "Hey, just a heads up, my aunt ran into your mum yesterday. Velma told her you're exaggerating everything. Said you've always been a bit dramatic." There it was, the shift. Not just silence, but smear. My withdrawal wasn't just being ignored. It was being rewritten. I set the phone down gently. No panic, no spiral. Just the sobering realization that when you stop playing your assigned role, the cast starts telling the audience you were never important to begin with. I opened my laptop again. New file, new folder. I titled it Pattern. Inside. I pasted screenshots, receipts, messages, not because I wanted to weaponize them, because I needed proof for me. For the next time I began to doubt whether it was really that bad, because when someone tries to erase you, the only way to fight back is to document the truth. Monday showed up with a grey sky and the kind of wind that whispers before it howls. I moved through the morning on autopilot email replies, half a breakfast, the mechanical brewing of coffee. The silence in my apartment had grown sharper, not because it was new, but because I wasn't dulling it with distractions anymore. It dared me to sit in it. So I did. Midway through checking bills, I opened the mortgage portal, the account Velma and I had shared since Dad passed. I wasn't expecting drama, just wanted to confirm that the last payment I'd made had posted, but instead, something unexpected sat waiting like a shadow in the corner, a new document attached to the property file. Revised ownership agreement. I clicked before I could think. The kind of click your body makes for you when your brain is too slow to catch up. The PDF opened quietly. Too quietly. My name missing. Cleanly, surgically removed. The deed now listed only 2 names, Velma and Curtis. No signature line for me. No request for permission. Just absence. Sanitized and notarized. I felt my breath falter, not from shock, but from the weight of confirmation. I called the county clerk's office, voice steady in a way that didn't match the pounding behind my ribs. A woman answered, polite and tired, like someone who had seen 1,000 routine betrayals in fine print. I gave her the file number. She pulled it up. Yes, she said, this revision was submitted 4 weeks ago. All processed. I asked if there was a signature from me on file. She paused. There's a signature. Yes, she replied. Alan M. Jennings. It looks tidy, but no ID attached. No verification. Just a scanned page. I didn't sign anything. Well, she said, voice dipping into something that wasn't quite concern. You may want to speak with a property attorney. If you suspect fraud. I thanked her and ended the call, fingers trembling, but not from fear, from restraint. Fraud. My mother's hand, likely guiding the pen, a single line across a legacy. Again. I opened the pattern folder and dragged the revised deed into it. Then I renamed the document, not forgotten, just removed. Still sitting at my desk. I pulled out last year's flyer from the community fundraiser I'd anonymously supported. Velma had shown up in pearls and a pastel blazer, smiled for the mayor, delivered a speech so rehearsed it made people cry. The newsletter the following week dubbed her the beating heart of the Jennings family. There was a plaque. There was applause. My name wasn't mentioned. Not in the credits. Not in the margins. I added screenshots of that, too. I didn't call her. Didn't confront anyone. Instead, I found the number of a real estate lawyer recommended by someone at work. I wrote a short email, attached the files, explained the timeline, sent it before I could hesitate. My hands shook, not with rage, but with the cold adrenaline of closure beginning to form. Later that evening, the light outside turned a soft, silvery blue, the kind that sneaks into the corners of a room and settles like fog. I hadn't changed out of my work clothes. My microwave dinner sat half-eaten. The TV was on mute. I was still... Then a knock at the door. Not timid, not uncertain. A knock that said, I'm coming in, whether you like it or not. I already knew. Velma stood on the other side, holding a pastel gift bag. The kind you grab from the pharmacy because it's closer than caring. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thought we could talk, she said, like adults. I didn't move aside. But she walked in anyway. She perched on the edge of my couch like it might stain her. I stayed standing. I know how things looked, she began, smoothing her palms on her jeans. But we honestly thought, maybe you needed space after what happened. What happened, I said, each word slow and even, was that you didn't show up. She waved her hand dismissively, as if waving away a gnat. There were misunderstandings. You're not always the easiest person to what I asked. She sighed sharply through her nose. The mask slipped. You're just so sensitive, she snapped. You always take things personally, like everything's about you. There it was, the classic refrain, the greatest hits of the unspoken family contract, that I was too much, that I made things harder. That I expected too much, gave too little, misread intentions. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit the frames they built for me. Not anymore. I looked her in the eye and said clearly, "No, I just stopped lying for you." She flinched, almost imperceptibly, her arms crossed, shoulders squared like armor. "I didn't come here to apologize," she muttered. "I just didn't want people thinking we abandoned you. Not guilt, optics." She placed the gift bag on the coffee table like a peace offering. I picked it up, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it gently into the trash. Not out of anger, out of clarity. When I turned back around, she was still frozen in place. I opened a drawer near the sink, pulled out a folder I had prepared earlier in the week. I handed her a single page. Every dollar, every date, every moment I paid to stay in a place I was never welcome. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. "This," I said, "is who you've been talking about behind my back." She looked down at the paper. Her eyes didn't widen, her lips didn't move, but her fingers tightened around the corners. I took a step forward. "Next time someone asks where I've gone, tell them the truth." I said, "Tell them I stopped paying to be invisible." Her shoulders sagged just slightly. The weight of performance finally collapsing. She stood slowly, adjusted her coat, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused, hand on the knob. "You'll regret this once you're alone," she said without turning around. I walked to the door and closed it quietly behind her, locked it with a sense of finality, and whispered to the stillness, "I've already been alone. This time, it's by choice." Friday came and went with the kind of silence that made you pay attention to the ticking of the wall clock. I didn't have much of an appetite, so I poured a glass of wine and let it sit on the table until the rim caught the light like it was trying to be remembered. I wasn't drinking. Not because I was trying to be strong, but because I wanted to feel everything that came next clearly, cleanly, without buffer. The apartment was still, the kind of stillness that used to unsettle me but now felt like a dare. Outside. The sky was already curling into dusk, that Colorado kind of dusk, where the air goes thin and the color of the light gets serious. I hadn't shut the balcony door, even though the chill had crept in. It felt honest, that cold, like it wasn't pretending to be anything else. I sat with my knees pulled to my chest on the edge of the couch, the throw blanket wrapped around me like armor. I thought about Velma's visit, her performance, her carefully chosen words. I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't twist it around in my head. This time, I just let it settle. Her words didn't cut anymore. They floated, static that had finally lost its volume. "You'll regret this once you're alone." Once you're alone. She had meant it as a curse. But the truth, I had been alone long before the silence began. I just hadn't known I had the right to name it. I reached for my phone, not to call anyone, but to clear the space. I opened the family group chat. I hadn't touched it in weeks. But the notifications had started again like clockwork. Emergency call tonight, 8 p.m. Let's be civil. Curtis needs support. No drama this time. Zaria had added a new group name, Family First, followed by a broken heart and a waving hand emoji. But they hadn't removed me. That would have required conviction. Instead, they just kept talking like I'd already walked out of the room. One message from Zaria sealed it. "Don't invite her this year. She ruins the mood." I didn't reply, didn't flinch. I muted the thread. Then I deleted it altogether. It didn't feel like rage. It felt like removing old wallpaper. I opened my inbox instead, needing something clean. There it was, a message from the real estate attorney. Subject line, final title. Adjustment confirmed. I clicked, read it once. Slowly, all removals processed. Your name no longer appears on the joint property. Effective immediately. No apology. No explanation. Just fact. My name was gone, and for once, I felt relief instead of grief. I exhaled, long and steady, not triumphant, not even proud, just steady, like I'd finally stopped bleeding from an invisible wound. I got to work. First, I unsubscribed Velma from the grocery delivery service she'd been routing through my account, a family share that had become a quiet tax on my bank balance. Then, I shut off autopay for the streaming services Curtis had added himself to last year without asking. Logged out of the cloud storage Zaria used to dump baby photos and party videos without ever inviting me to either. One by one, I ended the shared accounts, the borrowed passwords, the invisible strings. Every click felt like peeling off a layer of skin I never asked to wear. Then I drafted a message. It wasn't a farewell. It wasn't poetic. Handled what I needed. No response required. I sent it. Not into the family group thread, just into the void, into my own closure. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. Named it Closure is Mine Now. Dragged in everything I had saved the revised deed. The screenshots. The birthday Instagram post, the receipts, the thread where Zaria said I was exaggerating, the email where Velma denied ever borrowing my emergency fund despite Venmoing it to herself the same day. I didn't plan to reopen that folder. I just needed it to exist. Proof not for them, but for me. Because when you've spent a lifetime being gaslit, you learn to save your own receipts. On my way to bed, I passed the hallway mirror. Something made me stop. I hadn't looked at myself, really looked in days. I stepped back. Same eyes, same face. But the posture had changed. I didn't look like someone waiting to be chosen. I looked like someone who had finally walked away. You broke me once, I whispered to my reflection. Now I'm the one leaving. I turned off the light. The room went dark, and for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of it. I was free. Saturday arrived not with urgency but with gentleness. No alarm, no unread messages flooding the lock screen, just soft light from the window filtering across the hardwood floor. Like the day itself was trying not to startle me. I got up slowly, stretched in place, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The apartment smelled like quiet, like fabric softener and air that hadn't been disturbed. I made coffee again, the way I always did, 2 scoops, one steady pour, but today I sipped it without watching the clock. There was nowhere I had to be, nothing I needed to save. I was untethered, but not adrift. There's a difference. This kind of quiet didn't echo loneliness, it echoed freedom. Still, I wasn't ready to spend the whole day inside my own head. I had planned this visit days ago. A small detour, really, nothing grand, just a trip to Edith's care home. I hadn't told anyone. It didn't feel like something I needed permission for. I brought a store-bought chocolate cake with a crooked candle taped to the lid. Not because I expected a celebration, but because rituals matter even if no one else shows up for them. In the passenger seat sat a paperback copy of All the Pretty Horses. Its spine softened from years of turning. It had belonged to Dad. I'd found it tucked into a storage bin labeled Winter Coats. It felt right to bring it with me. The drive from Denver to Boulder was quiet. The highway mostly clear, the sun low and syrupy behind the cottonwoods. Their branches swayed in the wind like they, too, were tired of holding it in. I passed the restaurant where I had waited just days earlier, the ghost of that moment visible only to me. This time, I didn't look twice. When I arrived at the care home, the woman at the front desk simply nodded and buzzed me in. She didn't ask questions. Maybe she didn't need to. Some visits explain themselves. I found Edith near the front window in the common room, flipping through one of those oversized magazines with big pictures and easy words, the kind made more for company than for curiosity. She looked up as I approached, squinting at first, then breaking into a slow smile that crinkled every corner of her face. "Well," she said, folding the magazine in her lap. "Would you look at that happy belated birthday to me?" I replied, holding up the cake like a trophy. She laughed, a soft, rattling sound. "You're the only person I know who brings her own cake to her own party, with one candle," I added, "and no guest list. One guest is enough," she said, her voice warm and matter-of-fact. I set the cake on the coffee table between us and dug out the lighter from my purse. I usually carried it for frayed shoelaces or stubborn incense sticks, but today it had a new job. I lit the candle. The tiny flame flickered against the window light, fragile and proud. We didn't sing. We didn't make wishes. We just sat in the glow of what it meant to be seen. The cake was too sweet, and the coffee too bitter. But none of it mattered. Edith poured our drinks from a pot that had clearly been on the burner too long. We sipped anyway. In that moment, I felt more cared for than I had in years. After a while, she leaned back and looked at me carefully. "I never had a daughter," she said, "but if I had, I'd have wanted one like you, not soft, stubborn, the kind of girl who doesn't wait for someone to offer her a chair. She just drags one over and sits down." I stared at her, blinking a few times too slowly. Her words hit like truth always does, sharp at first, then soothing. The kind of truth you didn't realize you needed until it fills the hollow space where love used to live. "If I'd had a mother like you," I whispered back, "maybe I wouldn't have spent so many years learning how to survive rooms where no one saved me a seat." She didn't reach for me, didn't hug me, just nodded, like she'd heard something that didn't need a response. Some grief doesn't explode. It doesn't even spill. It just settles. When I left, the sky was that late summer lavender that only Colorado seems to get right. The light skimmed across the dashboard as I drove, quiet and calm, like a promise I hadn't expected to be kept. Back home. I carried the now empty cake container to the trash and set the book down on the kitchen counter. I didn't check my phone until I'd poured another glass of water and kicked off my shoes. The screen lit up one missed call, voicemail from Velma. I already knew. Her voice was strained, breathy with effort. "You've made your point," she said, clipped and tired. "This family is breaking because of you." I didn't finish the message. I deleted it halfway through, because the guilt wasn't mine anymore, and I wasn't going to borrow it back. Downstairs, my mailbox held a plain white envelope with no return address. Legal-sized. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. When I did, it confirmed what I'd already accepted. The property title was officially amended. My name no longer listed. No more shared responsibilities. No more inherited debt. No more ownership over something I was never allowed to belong to. I stood there holding the paper like it was both a wound and a bandage. Inside the apartment, I lit the candle I'd used at Edith's, just to mark the moment with light. Then I sat down at my desk, opened a fresh note card, and began to write. Happy birthday. Aylin, you were worth showing up for. I placed the card next to the only framed photo I still kept me and Dad, knee-deep in a lake somewhere upstate, laughing like we didn't know yet how hard life could try to change us. That was the kind of memory I wanted to preserve, not the moments I paid for with my silence, the ones I lived in fully, without expectation or exhaustion. Then I opened my laptop, new folder, new file, title, What I Owe Myself. Chapter 1. I didn't write to prove anything. I wrote because I could, because the story was finally mine. Sunday arrived before the sun had the courage to rise. I didn't need an alarm. My eyes opened to stillness, the kind that doesn't beg for attention, just settles next to you like an old friend. No urgent notifications, no calls, no calendar reminders buzzing like guilt. I sat up slowly, feeling the softness of the sheets, the warmth of my own skin. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't bracing for anything. I wasn't preparing for the next breach or apology. I was just here. Awake, alive. Alone, but not lacking. I moved through the apartment barefoot, grounding myself on the cool floor. Each step felt intentional, like I was stepping into a life that no longer required permission. I brewed coffee slowly, savoring the way the scent unfolded in the quiet. The plants by the window needed watering. I talked to them like they were old friends. I even picked up that book I'd promised myself I'd finish, a collection of essays on stillness. I'd never gotten past the introduction. A moment passed where I almost forgot to check my phone. When I did, the screen lit up with a list of missed calls. 1 from Curtis, 2 from Velma, 5 from a number I didn't recognize. The family group chat, once renamed Family First, had undergone another transformation. Family Unity SOS. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside, but curiosity is a stubborn echo. The messages spilled across the thread like broken furniture after a storm. Curtis. Let's talk tonight. No judgment. Just solutions. Velma. We need to regroup. Zaria. Don't invite her. She ruins the mood. There it was again. The reframing, the rewriting, the quiet, strategic exclusion. They weren't removing me. They were pretending I had already left. I stared at the thread, thumb hovering, then hit mute, then delete, not out of anger, not out of finality, out of peace. I opened my inbox, searching for something that would pull me into the present. There it was, an email from my attorney. Subject line, final title deed. Confirmation. The message was clinical, direct, all accounts updated, all joint responsibilities terminated, effective immediately. The last tie had been cut. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it. I didn't even tell a friend. I just closed my laptop slowly, like I was sealing a chapter I no longer needed to reread. Then I got to work. I cancelled the grocery subscription, still delivering artisan snacks to Velma's doorstep every Thursday. I reset the passwords on my streaming services. I closed the shared cloud drive that Curtis had been dumping videos into without my consent. With every click, I peeled off another layer of obligation that had long since outlived its kindness. Each action was a prayer disguised as a boundary. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a travel site, not because I needed to escape, but because I wanted to arrive. I wasn't running away. I was making space, booking a seat at a new table, one where I didn't have to ask for a chair or carve my name into the back of one just to prove I'd existed. No final speeches, no poetic exits, no carefully curated social media captions, just a quiet decision. Before I closed my laptop, I clicked into the document I had started after visiting Edith, the one titled, What I Owe Myself. The cursor blinked, waiting. I typed slowly. Lesson 1. You are allowed to leave the table when love is no longer being served. I hit save. Leaned back in my chair. Let the silence answer for me. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Curtis. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I already knew it was another demand masked as desperation. Another attempt to guilt me into coming back into a room they kept locking from the inside. I didn't need to fight anymore. I had built a door. I opened my closet, reached for the folded sticky note I'd written the night of my birthday, the one I'd left at the restaurant. 5 words. Thank you. No more seats. I pressed it against the back wall of the closet where I'd taped the last photo of Dad and me. Our hands full of fishing rods. Smiles caught mid-laugh. Barefoot in the sun. I stared at the image until my breath slowed. He had seen me, always had, in a way no one else had bothered to. That's what I would hold on to, not the void, the vivid. I went back to my desk, opened a fresh document. Title Chapter 2. After them. Not to revisit the pain, but to make room for what came next. Sometimes leaving isn't about turning your back on family. Sometimes it's about turning toward yourself. The following Monday felt different, not because the sun shone brighter or the air smelled sweeter, but because I no longer carried the weight of being the forgotten one. I was lighter in a way that didn't feel fragile. It felt rooted, like something that had finally landed. I brewed coffee again. Not because I needed it to feel whole, but because I could enjoy the stillness without bracing for intrusion. There were no flashing notifications, no guilt-masked voicemails, no reminders of responsibilities I hadn't agreed to. The stillness was earned, not a punishment, a prize. The moment I logged into my inbox, I saw them. More missed calls, more guilt-threaded texts, more shadows from a dynamic I'd left behind. Velma's message read, "We didn't raise you to be cold." And Zaria, right behind her, "You're still family. Family doesn't abandon." It would have made me pause before. I would have read it 3 times, wondering if I was overreacting. Not this time. They didn't raise me to be cold. They raised me to be silent, to serve, to stay invisible while applauding others. And now that I had stopped clapping, they called it betrayal. This wasn't abandonment. This was preservation. I didn't reply. I didn't even finish reading the thread. I placed the phone face down and let it hum its quiet chaos without me. I walked to the bedroom closet. My eye caught the photo taped to the back wall, me and Dad. Sunlit and honest, unposed. It didn't ask anything of me. It just reminded me who I was when no one else was in the room. I reached for a sticky note and scribbled something simple. "You didn't raise me to break. You taught me how to hold." I pressed it next to the photo, smoothed it flat, stepped back. That was the legacy I would keep. Then I went to my desk and opened the file I'd started after seeing Edith, the one that had grown slowly, line by line, into something more sacred than any family scrapbook. What I Owe Myself. The cursor blinked at the top of Chapter 1. I scrolled to the end and began to type again, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I had finally given myself permission to speak without a filter. Lesson 2. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I paused, reread it, then kept writing. Lesson 3. Your value isn't measured by who claps for you. It's measured by how often you've stood alone and still shown up. I hit save, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a footnote in someone else's story. I was the one writing the headline. Later that day, I booked a flight not to escape, but to begin again. Somewhere new, a place where no one knew my name, so I could say it with certainty. I packed light, just essentials, Hermoma. As a book, a journal, a small framed photo of me and Dad. No notes from Velma, no scarves that didn't belong to me, no emotional IOUs tucked into side pockets. I left behind the house I helped pay for, but was never allowed to claim. The family group chat that turned into a tribunal. The voice messages that asked for help, not healing. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't write a goodbye letter. I didn't owe them a final scene. I just walked forward. Through the airport, onto the plane, into a new rhythm. The first night in my new space. I didn't unpack. I didn't even turn on the lights right away. I stood near the window and looked out at the unfamiliar skyline. It didn't sparkle. It didn't welcome me with open arms. But it didn't ask anything of me either. It just let me be. And that was enough. I opened my journal and wrote a sentence I'd carried with me for years, but never dared to put on paper. I'm not difficult. I was just expected to make myself small for too long. Then I wrote another. The life I'm building doesn't require permission. I closed the notebook. Poured a glass of wine, toasted to no one but myself. Somewhere, the family thread would light up again. Someone would say I was overreacting. That I always had to make it about me. That I was selfish, ungrateful, cold. Let them. I didn't owe them a rebuttal. I owed myself a return to voice, to peace, to worth, to rooms that held my name with reverence. I sat on the couch with my legs tucked under me and looked around. The furniture was second-hand, the walls still blank. But it was mine, my table, my story, my rules. And as the night deepened and the room grew quiet, I smiled, not the kind of smile you fake for someone else. Psha. The kind you offer to yourself when you realize you didn't need a seat at their table. You were always meant to build your own.